Thank you, Peterborough Democrats. My name's Swalwell. I represent a congressional district in San Francisco, and I just came here tonight on a Sunday in February because, yes, I am considering running for president, and I would do it because I think a vision of going big, being bold, and doing good is what it takes to bring the promise of America to all Americans. But first, yes, there are some nuptials to celebrate tonight. I think it's Amelia and Hunter. Congratulations. I have one piece of advice I can show you. Wait on kids. Just wait. My wife is on to me. She told me this morning because she's on her way to a work trip and I'm here and back home. And she said, I get it. I get why you were in Iowa last weekend and New Hampshire this weekend. You're just trying to get sleep. But I want to tell you more about that vision and what I learned at 9 years old at 6 o'clock in the morning, riding on my bicycle through an old steel town in America. I was born son of a cop. My brothers are all cops today. My mom, she raised us boys making dollhouses in the garage, baking wedding cakes in the kitchen, and believing if she sold enough of them, we could do better for ourselves and that she could dream bigger for the rest of our family. They just wanted one thing from me, to be the first in the family to go to college. And so my dad worked as hard as he could as a cop, moved us all over the country from California to Oregon, all across different parts of Iowa, believing that that hard work would add up to something. And when I was 9 years old, they expected I would work as hard as they did. So they put me on a damn paper route. And I'd fold those papers and I'd ride my bike, and I saw that the American dream had made it to some blocks on my route, but not all. I saw there were big houses and some that were small with multi-generations in them. I saw some houses had 2 cars, some had none, and many houses didn't receive the newspaper at all. And I wondered as I rode my bike whether my family, my parents, whether we'd be able to root ourselves in a community so I didn't have to move anymore and make new friends because they could realize the American dream of home ownership. Well, the hard work paid off. I got a soccer scholarship. Went back east, played Division I soccer. Went to law school and became a prosecutor. Working in a courtroom to do what my dad did on the streets. Bring justice. And even working as a prosecutor, I saw, as I would talk to homicide witnesses in West Oakland, too often it was young black men, and through the piercing sounds of the police sirens outside and looking at the crumbling schools across the street and the payday lenders and the liquor stores on their blocks, I knew the promise of America was not reaching them. Didn't matter how hard they worked, how smart they were. It wasn't reaching them. I got elected to Congress after being a city councilman in Dublin, California, sister city to Dublin, New Hampshire. And what I saw when I ran for Congress, beating a 40-year incumbent and leading the youngest members of Congress across the country in a group called Future Forum, was that the promise of America was not reaching too many Americans. You know, I started this group, Future Forum, of the youngest members of Congress, to make sure that we weren't just the IT help desk to our more senior members, but we set up like a lot of Facebook and Instagram accounts. But our younger, newer members, like Chris Pappas, thank you New Hampshire for sending him to us, the millennial-minded Annie Custer, who fights for you every day. I saw in so many places that young people were racking up a lot of student loan debt, chasing the American dream of going to college, but just running in place. So I'm here tonight because I want to link arms with you to bring that promise of America to all Americans. And I think it starts by going big on the issues we take on. No more governing crisis to crisis. Being bold in the solutions we offer on healthcare, education, reducing gun violence, and the environment, and doing good in the way that we govern, believing that we're not the enemies the president wants us to be, that Republicans and Democrats, like my 2 Republican parents, can work together to seek these solutions. On healthcare, to bring that promise of America to all Americans, we need to have a healthcare guarantee. Universal coverage that says if you're sick, you'll be seen, and if you're seen, you won't go broke because of it. But I hope we go so big and act so boldly that we believe that what we do best as Americans is strive for what's out of reach. I would take $1 trillion over 10 years to find cures in our lifetime. I meet too many patients with ALS and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and cancer who've lost faith that Washington can be an advocate in their lives because we govern so incrementally. And we spend 100 times more on national defense than medical research. What if we believe that the tip of the spear of our national defense was the health of the people who we need to defend us? What if we put a whole new generation of scientists to work and invested in data sharing, targeted therapies, and genomics to bring down the cost and extend the quality of life? Go big, be bold, do good. On education, I think about young men like Quinn over here. Quinn drove an hour, made his dad drive over an hour to get here. Thank you, Quinn. Think about what is Quinn going to have for the skills he needs for this 21st century economy. Being the first in my family to go to college, it came with a price. I've got just under $100,000 in student loan debt today. And what I see is an entire generation in financial quicksand who's inventive and problem solving and optimistic. But if you're spending $500 to $1,000 a month to service your student loan debt, you're starting a family later. We're a part of the least homeowning generation America's ever known. And we're not taking good ideas and starting our own business. 3 things that we could do immediately for the 40 million people who have student loan debt. First, the interest on student debt should be 0. We should have a high interest in putting that money back in the pockets of Americans. Second, allow people with student debt to refinance, just like a home loan and a commercial loan, to get the best rates. And third, let employers contribute to student loan debt, tax-free. And let the employees receive it as a benefit, tax-free. On college, I think the best thing we can do for people like Quinn who are on their way to college is to give every American a college bargain. If you work through college, through work study, and you come out and with volunteer hours serve a community in need, the college bargain is you get a debt-free education. If you work for it, it should work for you in America when it comes to college. And then when it comes to our communities, I want to make sure in our infrastructure spending, we build modern schools in every community, not just the ones that are wealthy and have property taxes to pay for. Infrastructure spending should have construction costs that prepare our kids for this new economy and value our teachers who are getting them ready. Always value our teachers who are getting them ready. When it comes to our health, when it comes to our education, it's time to go big and be bold. When it comes to our environment, we should address climate change by making sure that in every place in America, even the communities that have pipelines, that climate change doesn't start an argument. It starts a workday. Because we can look those pipeline workers in the eye and assure them we're going to give them a bridge to this green-collar economy. That right now, while they're still working on the extraction of dirty fossil fuels, we'll invest as a country in carbon capture and carbon sequestration to make sure that those sites are carbon neutral. But we're going to give them a skills guarantee and a paycheck guarantee so they can go into wind, solar, alternative fuel cells. And that will all leave a healthier, cleaner, greener earth for our kids. And no worker ever again in America will be told they have to choose between their job and clean air and clean water. Go big, be bold, do good. Finally, when it comes to young Americans, if you talk to any of them, in their middle schools and their high schools, they're just filled with fear. They're afraid they're going to be the next victim of a mass shooting, who will be forgotten a week later when the next one happens. And on this issue, I just believe, as a parent, someone who's worked in the schools before, and as someone who's talked to a bunch of Republican family members who are NRA members, that we love our children more than we love the most dangerous guns. We love our kids more. Because Granite Staters stepped up, because we won the majority this past year, we're going to pass background checks next week in the United States Congress. Every firearm and we're going to need you to put pressure on the senators to make sure that they pass it.
Yep.
And then once they do it, we're going to have to put pressure on the president. But I think we can go bigger and be bolder when it comes to protecting our kids. I think we can take the most dangerous weapons out of the hands of the most dangerous people and buy and ban and buy back the 15 million assault weapons that are out there. And say to every family that your right to hunt with your kids, which I did with my dad growing up, your right to go to a range and shoot a pistol, and your right to protect your house with a shotgun will not be touched. But we're going to protect children in America, dancers at concerts, shoppers at the mall, parishioners at their synagogue, from these mass shootings. Go big, be bold, do good. And when it comes to how we're going to find consensus in Washington, where you've already found it outside of Washington, it's scrubbing our government of dirty maps that are gerrymandered and dirty money that pollutes our ability to defend ourselves. Let's have independent commissions, not just in California, but I know you're going to try and do that here in New Hampshire. Let's do it in all 50 states. And when it comes to the money, let's make sure corporations have to tell their shareholders how much they're spending and strip down to the studs the Citizens United rule.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, my mom and dad are Republicans. I married a Hoosier from southern Indiana who grew up with the Pences. And I see, not just when I'm passing dessert at Thanksgiving or passing laws with my Republicans in Congress, as I've done, that we're not enemies of each other. That we can collaborate on many more issues than the current occupant of the White House wants us to. The next president is going to have to heal a deeply divided country. I think putting Republicans in the cabinet who knew better and spoke out during these tough times is a step forward. And counting on them to be a bridge on all of these issues where we have consensus from Republicans and Democrats can also heal a very torn country. It's something that I've just been wired to do. And you may have noticed I also do go on Fox News. Not just so my parents can see me on TV, that's the only way they would. Because I don't think we can dismiss every person that voted for the president. But we can dismiss his ability to deliver what they were so desperately and needed and counted on him to bring. That promise of America. Work hard, do better for yourself, dream bigger for your kids. It's a promise every American is worthy of seeing on every floor of every building and every block of every street. In 1941, Franklin Roosevelt said, every man, woman, and child in the world, not just in our country because he knew we were more connected, should have 4 freedoms. The freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from fear, and the freedom from want. All 4 have had a wrecking ball taken to them in the last 2 years. Let's do all we can to restore those 4 freedoms. Make sure the press is no longer the enemy of the American people. Make sure the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of our country and not a Muslim ban. Get rid of the fear-mongering of the caravans that are invented every single week. And make sure that Social Security that retirement promise that every American has and paid into is still there and not rated to pay for $1.6 trillion in tax cuts. Let's restore those four freedoms. But Peterborough, I think we can go bigger and be bolder and add a fifth freedom, a uniquely American freedom, the freedom to dream. The dream that my parents dreamed for me in an Iowa driveway when my dad would bring the police car home, and I told him, I want to be a cop just like you. And he told me, son, it doesn't work that way. We're going to work hard so you do better, and your kids can dream bigger. And the dream that every Granite Stater has for their kids. That if you are free to learn, you're free to dream. If you're free from discrimination, you're free to dream. If you're free to drink clean water, breathe clean air, you're free to dream. If you're free from fear in your classroom, you're free to dream. If you're free from outside discrimination from our enemies and interference in our elections, you're free to dream. And if you're free to work, even at 9 years old, freezing your face off, delivering newspapers, looking at big houses and thinking that one day you can work hard enough and live in one of those, you're free to dream. That's the promise of America. It's not reaching all Americans right now. I know that's why you're here. I hope you'll link arms with me and make sure it's true everywhere. Thank you so much.
Got time for a few questions because you're from New Hampshire? Before we do, big shout out, round of applause for the Post and Beam for having us here.
Matt, Jeff's Brewing beer.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. So yes, I know the Oscars start in like a half hour, so I want to get some questions in. Just 3 predictions. Best drama, The White House. Best actor, Donald Trump. Best actor, Vladimir Putin. Listen.
So I love your ideas. I think you did a great job on the speech. But when I hear those ideas and I think about Medicare for all and what that's going to do for this country, and I think about the Green New Deal, there is going to be a tremendous amount of financial engineering that has to go on. And when I look in your background, I don't see any role you've held where that's been your primary focus, including your current House committee assignments. So help me understand your financial literacy, your economic literacy, that would make you the very best leader of this country to take us through that really difficult trip.
Yeah. So I got my start in public service in Dublin, California, which was called, I don't think it's called it here, when I grew up, Scrublin. And that was because when I was growing up, 1/3 of our kids went on to college. We only had fast food restaurants, no high-end employers. We didn't have any rail or transportation to connect us to Silicon Valley or San Francisco. I saw over time that leaders in the community, and I include myself in that, when I got on the Arts Commission, the Planning Commission, and the City Council, that advocacy that we made to get rail to Dublin, advocacy that we made to renovate our high school and go out to bond so that we had a modern high school, advocacy that we did to have a sales tax reimbursement for any business that came into a dilapidated area, they would get 50% of their sales tax back, that kind of advocacy turned us around from Scrublin to Dublin, where a high school had 1/3 of its kids go to college, today over 3/4 do, where we have Fortune 500 employers in our region, where we're connected now to all that opportunity by rail, and where we even have a damn Whole Foods that none of us can afford to shop at, but that's a sign that you made it. So we had to budget only in Dublin and in most cities in America, you could only spend what you took in. And we did 1-year budgets, which is actually a lot better than Washington is doing today. And so those small town principles of budgeting taught me a lot about making sure that you pencil out, but you also can make investments where the return on the investment justifies spending so much money. I see that in healthcare, I see that in education. Now, where would I get the money to improve our healthcare system, make sure kids had modern schools? A couple places. One, the capital gains tax. I would make sure that a CEO or a multimillionaire is not effectively escaping their tax liability by paying half of what they should because they're masking it in capital gains. As far as corporations, I would actually give corporations a lower tax rate if they had profit sharing and equity sharing. So that way, every person on every floor could reap the benefits of lower taxes. And then when it comes to our national defense, we will always be the strongest military in the world, but we're not going to spend more money on our defense than the next 7 countries in the world, because that's at the cost of spending money on our children and on medicine that people so desperately need. So I would reduce first the nuclear weapons budget. We have about 2,000 nuclear weapons, cost billions of dollars a year to maintain. I would put that in taking care of the people who served our country, our veterans, but also into paying for universal health care coverage. So I would say my city council experience, being the chairperson of the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee for the last 3 years, also setting the policy for the caucus in the Congress, but then just seeing that promise of America up front and center, and knowing that most Americans, they just want a basic bargain. If I put my head down, I do better, it adds up to something, look at my kids and dream big.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
What's your thinking on a free market economy?
I want us to have a free market economy, and I think the reason that a lot of people, especially young people, are drifting toward democratic socialists is because they don't believe capitalism works for them. They don't believe it reaches the floor of the building they work on or the block that they live on. And so I don't want us to become a socialist country. I want us to be a country where people believe capitalism gives them opportunity too. And so that has to be reflected in the tax code, and having a fairer tax code. It has to be reflected in having an inheritance tax again in this country, so that you're not just passing wealth generation to generation. That was taken away in this most recent tax cut. And it also has to be reflected in investing, as I said, not schools and communities that have a property tax base, which is the way we do education in America, but turning that on its head and believing that school construction costs should be a part of infrastructure bills, so that every kid in every neighborhood has an equality and opportunity. And I think that would be a dramatic change, but it would be one that would give kids everywhere a better shot than what they have today.
Eric,
Yes.
where are you on BDS and Representative Omar and all the backlash she faced for basically kind of being honest about AIPAC and the Jewish law?
Yeah. Well, first, she's a friend, and I brought my daughter to the House floor when Speaker Pelosi won that election, and Representative Omar asked to hold my daughter, and that was a picture that a lot of people saw, a young Muslim woman wearing a hijab holding a white man's baby on the floor of the House of Representatives. I don't think anything represented the change that we just brought in this new Congress by diversity, more than like that. That's one of the images I think that showed this new generation of members of Congress. Now, my position on Israel is this: they are one of our best friends in the world. They're the only true democracy in that region. But with your friends, you have to be honest. And with Israel, I don't support settlements. I don't support past settlements. I don't support future settlements. And I don't think that's a way to a two-state peace that is so desperately needed. However, I don't believe Israel is an apartheid state. I just don't accept that. I've been to Israel a couple times. I've been to Ramallah, and I've been to the Palestinian parts. And I see Arab Israelis who rely on their economy. I see Palestinians going across the border to work in their economy. And so I don't support BDS because I believe that stokes some of the anti-Semitism that is already growing. But I do support putting pressure on our friends to get a two-state solution. And I will just tell you, spoiler alert, Jared Kushner's not going to solve the problem. Oh. Yeah. So I think it takes leadership from an American president to put pressure on the Israelis, but also to put back in place the funding that President Trump took away from the Palestinians and put us back into the UN Commission on Human Rights, which the Trump administration pulled us out.
So, I mean, how do you deal with someone who's as belligerent though as Netanyahu? I mean, he goes to the White House and just makes Trump a little bitch, you know?
Yeah. Well, I would not.
Says Putin does, but I mean Netanyahu does it too. They've done it. They do it to every president. So how do you sit down with the Israeli leader and be like, hey, I don't like settlements. It's a bad idea, and nothing ever happens and nothing changes?
Well, they really wanted the embassy in Jerusalem, and they should not have gotten that unless it was a part of a two-state solution.
Emerson bought the embassy and created it. So
I think you have to be honest with your friends. Israel is a friend of the United States. We have to start there. The Palestinian people deserve to have self-determination, an economy, opportunity, and to live in peace too. But it takes leadership to get there.
Could you walk us through what you think is going to happen with the Mueller report, when it's going to be done, and then what happens after that?
You're going to see it. You're going to see it because you gave us power. And for 2 years, I sat there and felt powerless. And I worried that our democracy was crumbling, and that the long pole in the tent of our democracy, the rule of law, was about to collapse. But on the outside, you went from the town squares to the town halls, and you marched on the ballot boxes. And you gave us the majority. And I think we have to carry ourselves with confidence that that power gives us the ability to subpoena the report and rely on the courts to uphold the precedent of saying that executive privilege does not shield you from ongoing crimes. So if you just do arithmetic, we outnumber Donald Trump 2-1. We've got the legislative branch, and we've got the courts with the president. So you'll see the report.
Yes.
Why wait for the report? I mean, you're on the intelligence committee.
Yeah.
Why not just start investigating some of the things that might be out of the scope of a report?
We are. And so we just formed the committee, rechartered the committee in the majority, and we have 3 priorities when it comes to Russia. 1, fully understanding the collusion that took place, and we don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the highest standard in the land. If we have evidence that Trump family, Trump campaign, Trump business, Trump administration, Donald Trump worked with the Russians, you will know about it. Compromise. There's very good evidence that the president, through the decades of business he's done in Russia and the Russians who've done business in the United States, may be financially compromised. We should know that. And the evidence of that is vast. Most just look in the last 2 years, the way that he is incapable of standing up to Vladimir Putin, kicks out a U.S. interpreter or takes the notes from a U.S. interpreter while he's in that meeting, and then changes U.S. policy as it relates to Syria. It diminishes the role of NATO. I think there's evidence. We should pursue it, not jump to conclusions, but we should know if he's financially compromised. Also, let's not assume that he's faithful to Russia. He may be working with the Saudis and other countries as well. And so we should know that too. Collusion, whether he's financially compromised, whether he obstructed justice to avoid accountability. Thankfully in America, if you bury the evidence deep enough so that investigators can't find it, you don't get a get out of jail free card. There's a crime called obstruction of justice. If we find you holding a shovel and you have dirt on your shoes, we assume you buried something pretty deep because it would show your guilt. That's why we have that crime. And that crime goes to a consciousness of guilt. So collusion, compromise, obstruction of justice, we'll look at that. But let me just say this quickly. The reason I think we should care about Russia is first to make sure our elections are secure. It's about the future, not relitigating the past. These elections belong to us, as messy as they are. As much as my parents and my brothers and I disagree over who we're voting for, there's always been an acceptance on election night that at least it was our decision. And if that is questioned, and we wonder if it was another country's decision, again, we start to lose that faith in our democracy. Second, the Russians sought to help Donald Trump, not because they thought transactionally they would get something out of it. Collaterally, they've gotten them. Reducing sanctions, pulling out of Syria, diminishing the role of NATO. They've gotten that collaterally. But they know, just like you and I know, that Donald Trump could not organize a 2-car funeral. So they're not counting on that. The reason they invested in trying to help Donald Trump was to tear down the rule of law. Because they know that in America, no matter who you are, who you love, who you worship, where you come from, you can become anything if we do it right. And if that's true in our young country, it can be true anywhere, including Russia. And the best way to make sure Russians don't ask for that or demand that or go to the streets for that is to destroy that idea at its origin. The best example is the money that the Russians poured into the NRA. The Russians don't have gun rights in Russia. They're not spending money on the NRA to spread some belief that they deeply hold. They did it to just pour more gasoline on the fire, to turn us against ourselves, So we can't call them out on the world stage, and their people don't want free ideas, free markets, free speech. So as long as we make it about secure elections and the rule of law, I think most Americans, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats are with us.
Have any Republicans other than Trump benefited from Moscow's money to the NRA?
I think Republicans certainly benefit from NRA, and the NRA we know is benefiting now from Russian money. And
Will
so,
we ever see those connections?
yeah, we think that is part of our investigation.
And do you
Congress.
think that's
Yes.
part of the reason that some Republicans are not like jumping all over Trump? And why do you think they're protecting him?
They're afraid of losing their job.
Because
There's no
he-
courage, and what's so striking to me, because I've talked to them underground, I've tried to get them on my independent commission bill to take this out of Congress and have an independent commission look at what the Russians did, and the number of them who tell me, I know what they did, I want to be on your legislation, but I'm not kidding you, I've heard this phrase before, I can't afford to have my head lopped off by Trump. They're just afraid.
So they care more about their jobs than they do about this.
And here's what's so striking. If you're in the United States Congress, I would hope that you are otherwise employable, and this isn't the only job.
Very scary. That's the scariest thing to me. That's the scariest thing that's happened.
The scariest thing is Mitch McConnell.
Yeah.
I think he's more of an enemy of the people than Trump is.
But let's just beat them. Let's win the Senate, win the White House, and make sure we preserve our democracy. Let's just beat them. Yes, Kat.
I got a curious question for you. When did you become a Democrat in
Oh.
this whole Republican family?
Yeah. I went to Washington for the first time in 2001, 20 years old. My best friend who I grew up with, we were both first in our families to go to college. He went to Yale, I went to Campbell University first on a soccer scholarship. And he invited me to President Bush's swearing in. Never been to DC before. He got invited by like a Yale Republican group. I went there, didn't really know much of what to think of it, went back to school, took an internship on Capitol Hill that summer for my Democratic member at home. But it was really when I transferred to the University of Maryland because I lost a soccer scholarship to an injury. And I had to start paying out-of-state tuition and saw that Maryland would elect a Republican governor. I would start getting these notices from the bursar's office saying, you're going to be dropped from your classes if you don't pay. And I'd call home. I was already working side jobs as a restaurant waiter and at a gym near Capitol Hill. I'd call home and panic with my parents to try and get enough money for tuition and rent. And then I'd see the governor would raise tuition, reduce the state contribution. So I started leading protests. One time he went to the Bahamas the day that he announced a tuition increase. So his name was Bob Ehrlich. So I went and dressed as Bahama Bob Ehrlich and led 100 students. And we did a sit-in at the governor's office. I led a funeral for higher education where we got a hearse and did a funeral procession from College Park to Annapolis. But then I found a young mayor who was running for governor in Maryland to beat that Republican and promised that he would stop and freeze the tuition increases. His name was Martin O'Malley. And that was how I became a Democrat. It was hurting my pocketbook, hurting my dreams, and I saw that the Democratic Party believed in equality of opportunity when it came to education, and I saw tuition increases from a Republican governor. That was the turning point. Yes, sir.
Well, there's a hearing on gun violence recently, and I'm just wondering what you would do just to try and help reduce gun violence in the future.
Yeah. So I took as my State of the Union guest a Parkland survivor, and I took him to the State of the Union the night before that gun violence hearing. And I went up and got him out of the gallery when it was done. His name's Cameron Caskey. He stood up to Marco Rubio at that NRA town hall. And I told him I took him because he and his classmates had inspired me and gave me hope when I thought it was lost. So I went up and got Cameron, and I told him, Cameron, I'm sorry, the president spoke for about an hour and a half, didn't say anything about gun violence, but don't lose hope. Tomorrow we're gonna have the first hearing in over 8 years on gun violence. Why don't you come with me? So he did, came to the hearing. And in the following week, we passed background checks, which, Steve, you just Where's Steve go? Steve,
I think you
I'm right here.
Steve just told me that when you have background checks, you reduce suicides in the states that have background checks by a significant number. So a lot of gun violence deaths are by suicide. So background check can save people who have mental health issues, but also it can prevent the most dangerous weapons and the most dangerous people. Assault weapons ban. A lot of my colleagues and friends, they support a ban on future sales, which is great, and which I support. But I also believe you can't leave 15 million assault weapons in our communities and expect a different result. So that's why I support a buyback and then a ban. And if people aren't willing to sell it back, to restrict their use and possession to hunting clubs and shooting ranges. And I'll tell you, it's selfish. I don't want my brothers to be outgunned as police officers. They work in the Oakland area, and I tell them right now, you guys are outgunned as long as AR-15s and other types of assault weapons are on the streets. You're just outgunned. Finally, too many kids in too many cities don't have their friends featured in the nightly news when they're killed by gun violence. But gang intervention programs would go a long way to reducing those deaths. Community police officers, one of my brothers is a community police officer, having a cop who walks the beat in those communities and has police activity league programs can keep them from going into gangs. So there's a lot that we can do. Fortunately, we know what the solutions are. We just need the boldness to do it. Yes.
We first moved here, we had to fight off Kinder Morgan pipeline. And we fought really
Which
hard.
pipeline?
Kinder Morgan energy pipeline. And we worked across state lines with New York and Pennsylvania, and we found out all the information that, what was actually going around the states. We educated ourselves. They were calling us the low kill zone. There was going to be an 80,000 horsepower compressor station within a quarter of a mile of my home, and I was going to be able to see it. And we had just gotten our retirement home. We'd never owned a home before. We finally got our own first home, and this is the news we got 6 months after we moved. My question is, after fighting, and I mean we fought, all of a sudden he's deregulating everything. It feels like we're being let down. You know, what would you bring to that? I mean, people don't see that they're deregulating water, they're deregulating pollution, they're deregulating, they're giving the oil companies free rein now.
Yeah.
I mean, here in our state, they lie so much to us, it's not even funny, people don't even see it. We've caught companies in outright lies, and yet we're supposed to stand here and let them destroy what we have with eminent domain or whatever.
So three things. One, I would make sure that when it comes to pipelines, that you have a fully fledged operational environmental protection agency that can protect you and your community, that's funded and able to carry out its mission. Clean air, clean water. I know there's issues with clean water here in New Hampshire. There's issues in Flint. We have a clean water crisis in America, more of a crisis than what's being declared on our southern border. But fully funding the EPA and letting them do the job to ensure you have clean water, one. Two, making sure that communities who have issues of higher risks of cancer or higher risks of other diseases that you could get because of pollution or dirty water, that they have access to genetic testing. And I say that because it's hard to draw the correlation between what polluters are doing and what patients are suffering from unless you know what a patient is predisposed to. And so if you can show that someone in a community has never been predisposed to esophageal cancer, no record in their DNA through the science we know, yet now they have esophageal cancer, you can make a pretty strong conclusion that it's not based on their DNA code, but it's based on their zip code.
There is a list out there called the List of the Heart, put out by a company in Pennsylvania.
And so I would give these communities who are in higher risk areas access to genetic testing and genetic counseling. Third, again, as long as a pipeline worker thinks that they're choosing between their job and your clean water, we're going to see a divided America. And that's why I think we not only have to get the building trades endorsement as a Democratic candidate for president, you have to get their members' vote. And the way to get their members' vote is to look them in the eye and tell them, you're not going to see your paycheck affected, and you're going to have a skills guarantee as a bridge to this new economy. Then they're with us. And then it's purely about a cleaner, greener earth, and not a false choice between your job and addressing those issues.
Why don't we, as we approach 8, how about one more question? Oh my. Kath.
Eric, would you talk about the threats in DC to Medicare, age raising, et cetera, that they're talking about because they're trying to push over on seniors?
So last question was about Medicare. So $1.6 trillion in tax cuts, 83% of the benefits, 1% of the country. That has created, as you can imagine, quite the debt and the deficit. It's added to our deficit, grows our debt. To pay for that now, there are plans to voucherize Medicare. So rather than covering the costs, whether it's hospital stays, seeing a doctor, prescription drugs, they will give you a certain dollar amount, telling you that that's what you're worth. If you spend any more than that, it comes out of your pocket. And that's the guilt that they feel for the debt that they've contributed to. I will oppose that with everything that I have. Medicare is something that you and I and future generations pay into. And it's something we count on during that dignity of retirement. So let's fight that. But I think we can also make sure Medicare works for future generations, as hopefully we live longer. By the way, we may not have to worry about Medicare if this decline in age expectancy keeps going down, which is a result of our failure to take on 2 epidemics in America, gun violence and opioids. First time in my lifetime the age expectancy has gone down. But let's rely on innovation in medicine, as I said, cures in our lifetime. Let's rely on what artificial intelligence can do to tell us about fraud in the Medicare system. I've been meeting with businesses lately who are working with governments to make sure you can look at massive fraud, because when you use artificial intelligence, you can look at who the outliers are. So if you have a doctor in New Hampshire and a doctor in Ohio, and they both see 100 patients and they all have the same issues or similar issues, and one doctor's charging a lot more, we now, through data sharing, can identify some of these abuses and fraud, which will provide savings for Medicare and make sure we can count it. So I'm not going to let Medicare be touched, but I do think the return on the investment of innovation is you sustain Medicare, you extend the quality of life, and you create good paying jobs in the life sciences.
What about the age raising? They're talking from 65 to 67.
On Medicare?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't support it.
Okay,
So let me just again, I want to thank Steve, thanks for taking me around today. I want to thank Mike, I want to thank Port and Beam and its bartenders, and I want to thank you. I'm going to be back. I'm here in February on a Sunday with my kids at home, not because I'm just looking to see all the Dublins in America, because I really do want to change and bring that promise of America to all Americans. I hope you'll link arms with me to do it. Count on me to come back, but invite me to come back, and most importantly, tell me what I need to know to make sure that that promise reaches more people. Thank you guys again.